Okay, thank you very much indeed. Good evening all, and you're very, very welcome to this particular webinar entitled The Ukraine Crisis, Uniting Together in Service. We'd like to welcome everybody for taking the time to make it your business to attend this important webinar, and we apologise for the technical glitch we had, but it is our intention also to record and distribute this important webinar later on. We have the pleasure of the company of friends from Ukraine and indeed from other RENATE members who are working in Poland, Hungary and Romania at the borders, and you will hear from them in due course. Our speakers this evening will offer on their experience of the Ukraine war as it is unfolding for them. They will outline the challenges in their areas of work, and they will indeed explain on how things can be made a little better as they work to help safeguarding those who come across the borders. We know and hope that this webinar will inspire, provoke and inform. And should you have a question, comment, note of support or suggestion, then we would ask that you put it in the chat, as we have left some time at the end of this webinar to field some pertinent questions. And so I'd like to call on Sister Imelda Poole first, and I would like to introduce Sister Imelda Poole, IBVM, as a member of the Institute of the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Mary Ward Congregation, and serves as President of RENATE. Imelda is based on mission in Albania and has travelled throughout Europe, mentoring and training others, and is a leading spokesperson for anti-trafficking initiatives in Europe. Sister Imelda is one of only 8 people in the world given the US State Department Trafficking in Person Tip Hero Award in 2021. Sister Imelda, you have the floor.
Well, good evening, everybody, and especially we say good evening to you who have managed to combat high tech to get into this webinar in a difficult time for our IT team. I also welcome all those who are going to listen to this webinar at a later time, because we are going to post it on the web, and we know many others will want to listen to these amazingly brave people who are working at the coalface on the borders of the Ukraine and in the Ukraine itself. And we welcome especially our 2 refugee Ukraine women who are bravely working at the coalface in Ukraine and in refugee status in other countries. And we applaud you and pray constantly in our hearts for you and your families. If I may, I'd just like to share a very small PowerPoint, and oh, you're going to do that for me. Thank you, Brian. Is that right? No, that's wrong, isn't it there? Get rid of all that so I can share my screen, yeah. I think we can all see that now, yes? So this is the title of our webinar this evening, and it is sad news today, and we stay close to all the people who are uniting at this time in the service of all the people who are fearful and running from such a terrible war and a crime against humanity during this time. We have here figures of the wonderful Ukrainian people who have been so abused during this war. And as RENATE, we join together in service to be open in our hearts in prayer, and in our feet we walk the walk with you. Our member, Father Roman, is not with us tonight, but he has been constantly with us either through message or online. And here he is in Lviv, and he has taken on the task of being at the front line with the soldiers, blessing them and giving them courage on their way. He also has a social centre and is walking the walk with many, many refugees, feeding and enabling people to take courage and hope in such devastating times. RENATE is a network in Europe, and that is why we are here tonight, because what concerns one country of Europe concerns us all. We are in 31 European countries, including the Ukraine, Poland, Romania and Hungary, who all will be speaking from the borders tonight. We have 10 task groups, and one of these task groups is focusing on development. And in that task group, along with our communications team, we are raising funds and have received funds to help these people at the coalface and to support the Ukrainian people and those serving them. So tonight we are, as RENATE, joining hands in prayer and action for our people in Ukraine. I'd just like to begin with a prayer. We will be having a prayer in Ukrainian in a little while, but I thought it would be good to just open our webinar with this prayer. God of all peoples and nations, who created all things alive and breathing, united and whole, show us the way of peace that is your overwhelming presence. We hold before you the peoples of Ukraine and Russia, every child and every adult. We long for the time when weapons of war are beaten into plowshares, when nations no longer lift up sword against nation. We cry out to you for peace. And now I hand back to Brian, who will introduce our next brave speaker. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you very much indeed, Imelda, for setting the scene so well for us. I'd like to introduce you now to Natalia Kovalev, who is a Ukrainian citizen with a temporary stay permit in the Netherlands. She is a former coordinator of anti-trafficking network operating under the umbrella of Caritas Europa and then Caritas Internationalis. And we are delighted to be able to hear from Natalia this evening. Natalia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Brian. Dear RENATE members, dear participants of the webinar, it's my pleasure to greet you today at this event. Thank you for providing me with this opportunity to speak today and in general to be a part of the work that allows me to revive my skills and knowledge and use the experience I gained during 5 years of coordinating and assisting the work of the network of Christian organizations combating trafficking in human beings, for short, CODENET. Started as a European network in 2001, CODENET has rapidly evolved to become a global network under the legal authority of Caritas Europa and since 2009 of Caritas Internationalis.
He told her he was on the Home Affairs Committee.
My duties then included internal network management, such as administration and monitoring the communication platform, facilitating the exchange of information between members all over the world, maintaining and updating the public website for the project,
What'd you say, Barry?
potential new members and their joining the network. I also played a representative function for the network, was responsible for financial administration of the project, and last but not least, for the implementation of the annual work plan as set by the steering group in direction of assistance provision to trafficked persons, human trafficking prevention, advocacy, and networking. One of the most committed members who actively transferred knowledge to the network contributed to the development of joint advocacy messages and prevention activities were Sister Imelda Poole and Yvonne van de Kar. Quite often, the level of cooperation depended on a person representing an organization. And these two ladies, with their openness, creativity, and engagement, were a big asset to the network. I had to step out from the network in 2010 when my older daughter was born, in 2 years followed by girl twins. Having successfully coped with a number of resettlements, our family has finally settled down in the city of Ivano-Frankivsk in the western part of Ukraine. We bought an apartment there on the top floor of a 10-story building, fitted it to the girls' needs. The girls went to one of the best schools in the city, and we kept on building our plans for the next 10 years or so. Unfortunately, one day the girls had to wake up to the sound of bombing. After that morning, we were getting used to running down to the basement and back up to the apartment an uncountable number of times. We got used to spending a big part of our lives hiding from the air threat. In the beginning, I was determined to stay. I helped with weaving the nets. I hosted refugees from Kyiv. I continued to support my elderly parents, which is especially important because my father is immobilized and my sister has got the first group of disability. And so I thought I would be able to continue like that, but in a couple of days, I realized that children's psychological health has to be the priority for me. And we started packing all our lives in one suitcase. I should give a credit to my friends from the United States and from the Netherlands, namely to Marius Wanders, a former Secretary General of Caritas Europa, and my supervisor, who I've been reporting to while holding the position of CodeNet coordinator, due to whom my final decision about departure was taken. And Marius planned the trip for me and for the girls as thoroughly as possible. He provided with the most detailed contact information and instructions, and after 5 days of car trip, my 3 daughters and I have safely arrived in the Netherlands to obtain a temporary stay status. The help of Marius and his wife Anne-Marie, of Dutch people who are aware that we are present here, of the girls, teachers, and classmates at Dutch school, despite the language barrier, was and still continues to be fantastic and hardly overestimated. Yes, we made it to safety, being propelled by adrenaline and panic. The children were slowly recovering from the constant stress as a result of air raid, sirens, and military planes flying over our roof. As for me, in safety, I became overwhelmed by the feeling of guilt. In my understanding, this escape equaled to betrayal. I was depicting the worst wartime images, was subconsciously rewinding the terrible scenes, even in my dreams. During those anxiety attacks, I am encountered with deadlock in extreme hopelessness. It's impossible to correlate the cruelty, violation, the genocide of one nation with the international law achievements in the 21st century. You don't feel safe anymore. The heart cries out to the whole world, stop this, do something, do not sacrifice our nation to the huge Russian monster. Provide people with all the weapons and equipment necessary to liberate Ukrainian lands from the Russian occupation. Defeat the invading Russian armies and protect not only our freedom, but freedom of Europe from Russian tyranny. The war crimes and crimes against humanity that Russia is committing leave no doubt that Russia seeks the destruction of the Ukrainian state, the Ukrainian language, and the annihilation of the Ukrainian people. It has been so over the past centuries, but we have no right to let it happen again in the 21st century. My sister, who stays in Ukraine with my parents without the possibility to rush to a bomb-proof shelter, prays a lot. She hugs my mom during the air raid sirens and believes that God cannot allow this injustice, that there will be a way, that soon the sky will be closed from the Russian Air Force, and that no single Russian soldier will be able to step on our land. And those who come there to kill, torture, rape, and rob will face a fair trial. Now I'd like to invite you to pray Our Father. You will see a video showing paintings with sand on the Lord's Prayer, Otče Naš, in Old Church Slavonic, a precursor of the contemporary Ukrainian language. Saint Wizard Gert van der Veer made this feel and pray for the suffering of those affected in Ukraine. The film was made in March this year to support Ukraine through the campaign by Church in Action. The church building at the end of the video symbolizes churches that come into action in their support for Ukraine. It was part of a big nationwide appeal for help by Hero 555, the joint Dutch aid organizations to help in cases of disasters. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Natalia, for a very, very clear presentation and for the wonderful introduction to Our Father in Ukrainian at the end. I'd like to move on, if that's okay, to introduce to you Sister Gabriela Hasiura, who works in Poland. We are delighted to be able to introduce Sister Gabriela, who belongs to the Congregation of Passionate Sisters of St. Paul of the Cross. She works as a head teacher of a kindergarten in the city of Kutno, in the center of Poland. Sister Gabriela is a RENATE member since 2019 and is representing Poland, where the sisters are involved in helping victims of human trafficking and belong to the Bakita network under the care of the Conference of the Major Religious Superiors of Female Religious Congregations in Poland. She also cooperates with the Crisis Intervention Center, providing psychological and spiritual support to people in need, and is involved in the accompaniment of counseling of families who have lost a child. Sister Gabriela, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I would like to share my presentation. Oh, yeah. After this very moving prayer, our hearts are more open to see the suffering Christ in every refugee who arrives in our countries. It is true, many people from Ukraine arrive in our towns and cities. However, in cooperation with all sisters from the entire Bakita network in Poland, we are involved in organizing accommodation for them. It is time-consuming, and we have to reconcile it with everyday duties, but the gratitude and suffering of Ukrainian women motivate us a lot. Their painful stories of fleeing from shelling and being separated from their loved ones, husbands and fathers who have been banned from moving outside of the Ukraine in order to fight, touches us all. Their painful stories of fleeing from shelling and being separated from their loved ones, husbands and fathers who have been banned from moving outside of the Ukraine in order to fight, touches us all. I would like you to listen to Ella, a Ukrainian woman who works in our kindergarten now.
Меня зовут Элла, я с города Лозова, это Харьковская область, Украина. Очень болит сердце за то, что происходит сейчас в Украине, за тех людей, которые остались там. И это большое горе для всех отцов, матерей, детей, бабушек и дедушек, потому что люди гибнут, люди голодают, люди холодные, голодные, без света и каких-либо коммуникаций. Страшное время для всех, но я благодарна каждому человеку, который открыл двери своего дома, своего сердца, своих стран для украинцев.
Since the war broke out, we have been operating in the network and organizing ourselves in church groups or at the level of local governments. In our schools and kindergartens throughout Poland, there are about 10 to 20% more children, and we help them in such a way that they don't have to bear any costs for enrollment. As a head teacher of a kindergarten, on an everyday basis, I deal with providing care and education for over 120 children. The most important goal for me now is to enroll another 20 Ukrainian children and to take care about their moms. It is very important for children to be under someone's care because it not only gives them the opportunity to develop and live in a normal, safe environment, we also include the need to care for their mothers who really want to work. They need the time for a job at this hard time. This is the most important task. Women I meet are very grateful. They don't want to be troublesome and they are full of dignity and gratitude for everything. When it comes to Polish society, it is equal to the challenge. People want to help. Some of them lodge mothers with their children and others collect food, clothes and cleaning products. Most of the Polish religious congregations decided to lodge refugees in their houses in collaboration with Caritas, as well as in collaboration with the local authorities. I would like to show you what the help looks like as exemplified by the sisters in Lublin. But watching them, please be aware that in almost every religious house, we do mostly the same. On the second day of the war, sisters' home became a field hospital. They reorganized their lives immediately. They adapted the part of the house that was intended for retreat groups to take in refugees from Ukraine. The conditions at home are quite modest, but the atmosphere is friendly. Sisters have adapted the rooms by inserting bunk beds to accommodate larger families. They have also organized each patch of the house in such a way that comers can feel more at home. They managed to arrange a playroom for children where both young and old can find moments of shared joy and take the first steps in learning Polish. Their house has also become a home base for refugees who have finally crossed the border. They can stay there for a few days until they find or be found by a foster family, a house in which they could stay for longer. Sisters also try to ensure that during meals and other occasions, not only children, but also adults can find a safe space to talk, express their experiences, emotions, anxieties, and ask questions. Tell about the feeling of danger, pain, and great fear about those who stayed behind. Sisters hear out stories about the nightmare of their escape, the hardship of travel, the visible destruction of close and known places. The current situation on the Polish-Ukrainian border makes it possible for various types of criminal groups to seek to achieve quick profit by taking advantage of the dramatic situation of people fleeing military aggression. That's why, together with a team of lawyers, we have prepared a document on the increased trafficking in human beings on the Polish-Ukrainian border. The Bakita network, and in cooperation with Talitakum network, we have forwarded information on this matter to the Ministry of Justice. The ministry answered our message and increased support and controls on the border. Wherever possible, we also shared flyers prepared by the Ministry of Interior and by RENATE, of course. We also accept mothers with children who need layover. We accompany them from the border to the designated place because they are afraid to travel on their own. Imagine, they say that criminals flow here from all over Europe. The next very interesting way of helping I observe here is a remarkable phenomenon of giving support by residents of Kutno to Ukrainian passengers at the railway station. There is a large group of people in my town who don't want to remain indifferent to women and children passing by. At the beginning, I thought it would be a quick action, but happily I was wrong, because up to this moment, people still have been gathering at the railway station every day with sandwiches, toys, and little packages with the most necessary things, and share them with Ukrainian women and children. Sometimes even great mascots are present to cheer up the children. It isn't possible to tell you about everything which we have managed to do so far. However, there are also a lot of limits connected with the real lack of flats for refugees, places for children, and nurseries and kindergartens, and shortness of funds needed for necessary adaptations and for Polish language lessons. And finally, I would like to show you an image of an angel above Kiev. Maybe you have happened to see it on the internet. We all know that the arrangement of these clouds was random, but those who saw the angel filled with hope and faith. Ukrainian people are most religious and entrust their lives to God. So let's support Ukrainian nation with our prayer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Sister Gabriela, and your presentation is so full of hope in such bleak circumstances. And to all of your sisters at home, the work is just wonderful. So this is what we have seen that's happening in Poland, and I know it's only a flavour of what's happening, just a short piece. But if it's okay with you, Sister Gabriela, I'm going to introduce Mr. Sean Cole, who is working in Romania. And I have this pleasure of introducing Sean. Sean is a qualified attorney with extensive experience in the NGO sector, working in the area of human rights around the world. Sean has been with the International Justice Mission for 13 years in Cambodia, Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, and for the last 3 years in Romania, where he currently works in Bucharest as their director for Central and Eastern Europe. Sean supported the initiation and development of the legal task force group of the RENATE network, and currently Sean has designed, developed and led the Ukrainian response in Eastern Europe for the International Justice Mission, and he will tell us a little bit more about this important work now. Sean, you have the floor.
Thanks so much, Brian, and thanks everyone for the time. My biggest task, though, I think, is my 4 daughters that keep me busy most every day, and sometimes at night as well. But it's a great privilege to hear both Natalia, your story, and also Sister Gabriela, and all of the work that you guys are doing. It is, I think, as Brian said, a great glimmer of hope to see of so many things that can actually come out of a very dark time that we're all going through. So just a little bit of background. I have been working with International Justice Mission. It is an international NGO. We have offices in 33 countries around the world. And we decided to come to Romania to begin a hub of operations, examining and looking at trafficking trends and trafficking corridors, which we know historically have been in Eastern Europe going towards the West. And we had actually been designing a 9-year program looking at what are the key countries that we should have a presence in. And that actually ended up being, even before this, were Romania, Hungary, Poland, and Bulgaria, because we know that traditionally there is organized crime groups. We're working on cases with organized crime groups that go from Eastern Europe to Western Europe. And so this is actually a very key and prominent, well-established corridor. And so then when you add on hundreds of thousands of individuals, primarily women and children, there's a significant cause for concern. And there's a need for us to act very smartly and very with laser focus. IJM's model is to actually work on individual cases of human trafficking. So we partner with our government, law enforcement, so police, also prosecution service, and also social services, to try to wrap around a multidisciplinary, holistic approach to support victims as they navigate their cases through the criminal justice system, but also to ensure that there's safeguarding in place. And so through working on actual cases, we're able to identify all of the different gap areas throughout the criminal justice system response. And so what we see in many cases is that the judiciary just has an idea of the judiciary. The prosecution just has an idea of the prosecution. But by working cases through the entire system, we're able to identify where they're maybe missing or having gaps. And so that's how we develop our capacity building, our policy, advocacy, and other initiatives. And so, as I mentioned, we are looking at this 9-year strategy. So that's what was where we were when when the invasion happened. We actually had teams up in Suceava, which is near the border of Ukraine, near Suret, which is the largest border crossing. And so we were working with the Metropolitan Police out of London on on 2 cases actually, which is ironic because we are already working on cases in that area of human trafficking, of luring, of taking women out to Western countries and exploiting them there. And so we just kept those teams up on the border in Suret. And so we formulated an emergency response. And so initially, early on, that looked like transport, immediate transport, safe transport, working with shelter partners to provide food and emergency food and medicine. My family and I, we personally went up that first weekend, but we have had multiple carloads going up and taking food resources to different shelter partners there. And ensuring that medicine gets up, that clothes were able to go up, and then begin to work to find safe transport for individuals across the border. We also have developed 2 or 3 contacts that are now in Ukraine of an IJM associate, investigative associate, and 2 other networks that are running busloads of individuals out of Ukraine down into Bucharest or Sibiu in other areas. So we're also trying to support individuals that might need assistance out. And so we're working with Project Dynamo, which is another great NGO in partnership, again, no NGO is going to be able to do this work. And I think one of the previous speakers talked about working together. That's the only way that we're going to be able to move forward, is really working together, working through the RENATE. This is why this is a fantastic opportunity to come together and to share what we're doing, because we need to learn from Poland, we need to learn from Hungary, we need to learn from others, and then we can share what we're also learning as well. So working with Jesuit Relief Services and others, providing kind of this support, and then also welcoming people across, finding people that actually needed transport, connecting them to Project Dynamo, and then receiving them into Bucharest and other areas when they come across. And so that's what started to develop. But then with the community response that we saw in both Poland and in Romania, that was fantastic. I mean, at one point when we were up on the border, we saw that, you know, on the Google Maps, you see the red line where traffic is. It was equally long on the Ukraine side as it was on the Romania side, because there were so many people trying to get and pick up people and take them to safety, which was needed. It was snowing the first 2 weeks on and off on that border crossing. And the stories that we heard of individuals that we had picked up personally that had traveled 5 kilometers in snow with 2 baby strollers. They needed help directly across the border. But then we started seeing a need, because we saw really unvetted volunteers. We saw unvetted transport agencies, and we saw really unvetted accommodation. And so that brings concern. I think Sister Gabriella had mentioned this. And so there's some smarter ways of looking at that and building some of that capacity into proper vetting of proper safeguarding techniques. I think there was one report of one person from the UK that had traveled that had a history of sexual violence against children, was found on the border in Poland. He had traveled, he was not permitted to travel. We just got yesterday a first report of an Orthodox monastery where one young lady was sexually assaulted. And so we see this as coming. Unfortunately, we see this as beginning to surface more and more. And so we talk about the border. I've been contacted by BBC, by CNN, by New York Times, by the Guardian, the Independent. They all want the super exciting story of, you know, the trafficking person going across the border, but that's not actually reality. What we're seeing for the most part, and what we anticipate seeing, is most of the shelters are full now on the border. And so what we're seeing are people coming to large urban centers out of necessity. So Bucharest, Warsaw, other large cities, regional centers, Sibiu, that can house more people, because the borders are already saturated. And so we see people going there. And when we see perhaps people with less means that are now coming across, we will see they might come with 1 month, 2 month pay salary for blue collar workers working day to day. They might come with 1 month or 2 month salary, but their risk tolerance in about 1 month to the next 6 months is going to be massive. It's going to grow tremendously. And so what we want to do is try and to see where those vulnerabilities are, to try and see where people are being recruited, how they're being offered jobs, when they're being offered jobs, how they're being offered transport, and also advocate for work, for settlement for individuals. The EU directive on protection of people was a great thing that is going to allow Ukrainians to work where they find themselves. But really their risk tolerance over the next month to 6 months is going to be dramatically increased. And so we must be smart about what are the signs of trafficking, where are traffickers, where do they have access to refugees, and then assisting refugees as they might want to move from one area to another to help them do that wisely. And so IJM is going to, at least in Romania currently, we're hiring protection officers. You'll have the privilege of hearing from one of those, my colleague Carolina, in just a little bit. talking about what some of the work that fantastic work that she's doing. We're going to have them paired with kind of someone with a social work or investigative background, along with someone from Ukraine that knows the culture, that knows the people, that can begin to have conversations with them and do some of this protection work. Some of the other things that we're doing is we're continuing to provide emergency food and support, and then trying to use social media in a smart way. So developing TikTok messages that would target individuals that perhaps have their settings to Ukrainian language, looking at Facebook and others as well, to really target messages that are developed culturally sensitive way to support people. So that's what we're doing, and then we're also looking to expand that, because these were countries on our roadmap already, to look and find partners like Sister Gabriella and others that we can partner. So that's what we've seen. That's kind of our approach and where we're headed. Thanks so much for the opportunity to share.
Thank you very much indeed, Sean. You paint a very clear picture. And between yourself and Gabriella, you've both mentioned the criminality, and you've both mentioned how practical the support that is required. But what you've also mentioned is the number of people that are turning up unvetted, and the need to safeguard, and the need to mind everybody throughout whatever process of practical support continue on. Thank you very much indeed. So that's, we've heard now from Romania, and we've heard also from Poland. I would like to introduce you now to Sister Judith Knab, who is sharing her time with Sister Erica Ilays and both from Hungary. So I would like, in introducing Sister Judith and her colleague, Sister Judith is a member of the Congregation of Jesus for over 30 years in Hungary. Originally, she's a teacher, but for the last 5 years, she is working with the Salwadi Hungary Association, where her main mission has been prevention work, especially in schools, parish groups, or indeed in other religious communities. One of their goals is awareness raising, especially within the Catholic Church. And now, as most of the refugees are women and children, there is an increased need to communicate information about the dangers of trafficking in human beings, especially at the borders. Sister Judith, you have the floor.
Thank you, Brian, and good evening for everyone. First, I would like to give you an overview in what we are doing in Hungary from the aspects of the Catholic Church, especially from the different religious congregations. Hungary has a 100 miles long border with Ukraine, with 6 border crossings, all of which are small villages. As of today, approximately 650,000 refugees entered Hungary, of whom 95% are women and children. There is a special service what different Hungarian religious communities has offered Ukraine for the past 30 years. The reason of that is that there is a 200,000 strong Hungarian ethnic community in the western part of Ukraine, bordering Hungary, known as Transcarpathia. This area is very poor. The Hungarian Catholic Church and religious congregations were helping this small region, distributing food donations and monetary aid, as well as providing medical assistance and services before the war over the past 3 decades. It is the Franciscan mission which was and is very active in this region. From the first day of the war, the Hungarian state allowed anyone to enter Hungary who wanted to leave the war-torn country. Each of the 6 border crossing villages were assigned to one aid agency. Amongst them is, for example, the Catholic Caritas, the Baptist Aid, the Maltesers Aid, etc. The Conference of the Major Superiors in Hungary invited the religious congregations to make their donations and assistance to the refugees in cooperation either with the Catholic Caritas or with the Franciscan mission in Transcarpathia, or with the Jesuit Refugee Service, rather than separately, as you also mentioned, the working together, it is very, very important also in Hungary. Thus, by joining the work of these help organizations, we know about the following assistances offered by sisters and brothers of different congregations. Of course, this list is not all we are doing, just some examples. For example, collection of material donations and financial contributions, welcoming of refugees at the border and in Budapest, distribution of food and drink at railway stations and at the border, and very important, handing out awareness-raising sheets at the border with information how to avoid the traps of traffickers who offer accommodation and transport at the border. Another example, sorting donations in warehouses. There are some sisters working in warehouses to sorting donations. There are several sisters and brothers who are doing interpretation work, which is very important. Hungarian language is very different from Ukrainian language. There are several sisters or brothers who give emotional support. There is the Piarists order. They provide lectures to Ukrainian pupils in their school in Budapest in cooperation with other congregations who have got schools in the capital city. Several congregations accommodate refugees at their houses around Hungary everywhere. In the Church of the Congregației, in our church in Budapest city center, there is a Holy Mass celebrated daily in Ukrainian language. Besides of the liturgy and prayer, refugees can build community and can share information between themselves. In Budapest, it is a big sports stadium called BOK, where refugees arrive from the border. The Conference of the Major Superiors invited the religious communities living in Budapest or nearby to offer their assistance there. So in this stadium, it is a sister who is coordinating the work. The Jesuits are in charge of recruiting more volunteers, as the number of refugees is very high and is still increasing. Soon you will hear from Sister Erika, who is working there in this stadium. In this stadium, there are 2 designated areas for prayer and reflection, where also religious sisters and brothers are present. At the moment, Transcarpathia is the safest region of Ukraine. Many people who are fleeing from the east of Ukraine or Kyiv arrive here and need sheltering, food, clothing, medical help, and most importantly, emotional support. The Conference of the Major Superiors is now working on a large-scale donation project funded by UESG, which will be distributed to Ukrainian IDPs who have not yet left Ukraine, but have left their bombed homes and now are in Transcarpathia. Lots of these internal refugees want to stay there until the war ends. Caring for these many people is a huge challenge for the citizens there, and they need our help. So that is our thing we are doing, our help. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sister Judith. And you have been very clear in telling us the size of the operation that is in place and how quickly you have mobilized to put in place some, which would not only that, to also prepare for those who are have not yet reached your border, but are doing so. Before I move on to introduce Sister Erika, who will also tell us a little bit more about Hungary, just to remind those, if anybody would like to post a question or a comment or a suggestion in the chat, please feel free to do so. And because we have only 1 or 2 more speakers before we will be able to take some of those questions that you have. I'm going to introduce now, if that's okay, Sister Erika Illes, who is a helper sister. The Society of Helpers of the Holy Souls was founded in Paris in 1856 by Eugenie Smet, Blessed Mary of Providence. For 25 years now, Sister Eric has belonged to this international community of the Central European province of St. Ignatius Spirituality with Papal Rights. She is a pastoral counsellor, a psychologist, and sister trained in family therapy. She's been working for a 5th week as a volunteer with the Ukrainian Russian Refugee Service within the Maltese Charity Service. Among the many touching, beautiful, and difficult experiences, she would like to share now 2 divine providence experiences. Sister Erica, you have the floor.
Thank you, and good evening for everybody. I'm not a very well speaker for English, but I try it. After the outbreak from the Ukraine-Russian war, I was able to serve 2 or 3 times in the week to help forever good it was. Aid agencies set up things in Budapest railway station, providing food, temporary accommodation, and over travel facilities. Through the dedicated work of many skillful translators, we have been God's caring co-workers, mostly women and children coming to us. It is a terrible, vulnerable situation for them to leave a place of safety and flee to the foreign land. Now I would like to share my deeply experience with them. One afternoon, I was serving at the food distribution counter, where an elderly woman arrived, patiently waiting in the long line until she came near us, bringing 2 suitcases. We told her we couldn't keep it because so many people were coming and going that we couldn't keep it safe. But she brought them as a gift. I asked her what gave her the idea, and she told me that she had been looking around her home and thinking about how she could help these people who are so vulnerable. She had the great truth that she was getting on in years. She was probably not going to be travel anymore. So she brought her suitcases, which were still in good condition, to benefit those who just had run away from home with nothing. I was touched by what happened. 3 minutes later, I suddenly see an Ukrainian mother with 3 small children and grandmother. They have only plastic bags, food, toiletries, and some clothes. I immediately asked them. Then I had them the empty suitcases in which they could pack their luggage. Carrying in more easier, they accepted. I followed them with my eyes. I saw everything neatly placed inside. 2 minutes later, the Ukrainian mother came back, her eyes watering, her hand clapped in gratitude. I had to stop for a moment, praising God, giving thanks. How great is his creativity, his providence. He whispered, to an elderly woman to bring her suitcases, and here we are, immediately helping another family who in turn had their journey made in little easier. I was able to experience myself as a bridge and a wonderful instrument of God. Another story, crossing the border, refugees board on different trains and means of transport, while an elderly woman with a cat has lost the daughter and grandchildren. She was taken to the reception area of the box sport hall. After eating and drinking, the cat was fed. She burst into tears and asked for the help of the translator to find her daughter and grandchildren, who she had lost in the crowd. Their plan is to go to the west to the friends' houses until the work comes down. She was afraid they would turn back to look for her, even though she was already in Budapest. Her blood pressure skipped, slowly stabilizing with the help of the doctor. The phone was slowly recharged, but in the meantime, the police informed the border guards. Everyone started to fever research, and with the help of the phone, they researched. We find somebody who was on the crowd, and they find the girl and her grandchildren. But by then other aid organization had already accommodated and researched them that they would find each other. By the evening, the expected success had been achieved. The family was reunited, and the elderly woman's psychical condition had stabilized. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sister Erica. And I don't know what you were worried about with your English. You were perfectly clear, and we understood every single word of those two stories. Thank you so very, very much for those. And in actual fact, I think they serve as a perfect introduction to our next guest, who is Carolina Neskorenza. And Sean mentioned Carolina a little bit earlier. And if I could just say that Carolina is a Ukrainian citizen, a dual citizen from Ukraine and the US. And shortly after the invasion of Ukraine, she traveled to Romania. She quickly began volunteering with the International Justice Mission, where Sean works, and Project Dynamo, providing support for others coming from Ukraine. She's now employed working with teams from the International Justice Mission to support shelters, churches, and other groups housing and serving Ukrainians. She will be helping to implement safety standards for shelters and transport, along with others from the IJM team. She is passionate about serving those recently displaced and wants to ensure that all vulnerable people are protected. Carolina serves as a protection officer based in Bucharest, Romania. Carolina, you have the floor.
Hello, good evening, everybody. First of all, thank you for having me at your meeting. Thank you for inviting and sharing all your stories, personal experience, and all the work that you have been doing. And I want to help us say thank you for all the help that all of us Ukrainians and other people in need are receiving from our friend country like Romania and Poland and Moldova, Bulgaria, Hungary. It's a huge honor, and it means a lot to me, to my family, and to us. I can share briefly my story. I'm Ukrainian. I was born in a beautiful city of Kharkiv. It's an eastern city, and I grew up there, finished my university, and then moved to Kyiv. So I've been living in between, two capitals. Kharkiv was the first capital of Ukraine, and then Kyiv became, eventually the main capital of Ukraine. But Kharkiv was the first, and there was the first subway there too that my grandfather was building, actually. Why am I bringing this up? Is because we have a really deep rooted heritage and culture that I was grown up with, and this war definitely changed the course of our lives, for sure, forever. On the first day of the war, was in Kharkiv with my 87-year-old grandmother who was living there. So luckily I was there and I was able to evacuate her. And we drove to Kyiv, to Bucha. That's where my mom and my stepfather lives. We have a beautiful house there. And 10 days later, living under the bombing and constant fear that something might happen, we had to escape on our own risk from Bucha, driving through the highway and witnessing all the horrors of those images that all over the internet. It was very shocking and scared, and I can't even explain how that impacted us all, knowing that this is not a movie, this is actually happening right with us. We were helped to get evacuated with American group. It was really great and amazing experience. They really helped us to survive. Obviously, my stepfather stayed in Ukraine, so it was my mom, my grandmother, and I crossing Romanian border. And my grandmother had a precondition, a heart medical condition. And on the second day when we crossed the border, my grandmother had a heart attack in Romania and Bucharest. And this is when I want to say a huge thank you to Romanian government and all people who accepted us, who hosted us, who helped us, and all the doctors in Romania who literally saved my grandmother's life. That means a lot to us and to my family, considering that also my grandmother is a Second World War child survivor, and it's a second war on her account, and she survived it, and she's good, she's recovering, we're taking care of her. And that's how I got acquainted with Jenny and Sean and the IGM and other volunteers from this organization. And it just happened that I was at the place where they were helping, volunteering, accepting people at the hotel, and that's where we're staying. And I speak both languages, so I offered my help in translating. And then they introduced me to a church, Holy Trinity Church, where I was also attending and volunteering on weekends. So after a while, I asked for an opportunity to join the team, and luckily IGM was hiring and was expanding the team, and they saw some value in me speaking both languages, having education, traveling, having some experience. And for me, it was a great honor because Anna Maria, a lady from Ukraine, just said, for me, it didn't feel right to go back to United States and keep living, my life there when a lot of people are struggling. And Sean and I also, I'm helping Sean and IGM in ensuring safe transportation for people, working directly with partners, with NGOs, with churches, and helping to identify gaps in safety and venting out people, receiving people into the locations of shelter for potential, potential red flags or situations that could be improved. I'm also helping with the translation. I'm also helping to review and develop and prepare some key materials that would be helpful in Ukrainian to distribute around among refugees, and also help them as much as they need, with information, with awareness, what's going on right now in the country, in the neighboring countries, in the receiving countries. So, that's something that really brings me a lot of fulfillment, inner fulfillment, and the desire to help and be not indifferent and be aware and share with what I know and what I lived through. And also we're working on preparing a methodology of how to approach refugees traumatized by the war, specifically Ukrainian refugees in this case, how to approach them, what questions to ask, how to respond to their needs. And that also would help to vent out their possible situation in where they are, so they're not making a mistake, so they not making a wrong step, moving to a next country or getting acquainted with wrong people. Because as you well said, there are a lot of women, there are a lot of young women who are not aware, who don't speak the language, who are trusting and who are scared, and this war being really affecting many people emotionally and like psychologically, of with a feeling of loss, frustration. And it's so great that your church and community and IGM, like organizations like IGM, exist to really navigate and support and be present and build the system that would help to keep people informed, secured, and not being taken advantage of. And me as Ukrainian, I stand against this violence that is imposed on my nation and any other people who would be in the same position, because it's not fair. This is a huge injustice, and I guess this is part of my mission to add a value and give my input in the situation and help somehow as much as I can with my own experience and knowledge, and some things that I can do for it. So thank you again very much. I would be happy to stay in touch, and for anything that is needed, available. And once again, what happened to our family and that my grandmother survived, it's a huge sign for us that we're strong and will stand and survive and make things happen. So thank you.
Carolina, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And God bless your strength and that of your family. And I was actually going to ask again how your grandmother is, but at the very end, but you're saying now that your grandmother is good. Yes. And we're delighted to hear it. And again, like some of the stories we've heard, your story is so full of hope, and there is so much strength in what you do, having come from where you've been. And we have only a small concept of what has happened in Busha, but when you say the name Busha, we know exactly what you mean. So thank you for taking your time to be with us, and thank you for taking the time to be with Sean and his work in the IGM, which is even more important, I think, than this event this evening. So thank you once again. If you don't mind, I'm going to call on Anne Kelleher, and I would like to introduce Anne, who works as a communications person with RENATE since May of 2014. And Anne has been working in the background this evening, facilitating the broadcast of this webinar. Anne has been directly involved in the work that has culminated in successful application for the funding from Mission Cara that has helped RENATE to respond in a timely manner to the Ukrainian crisis by providing funds to some of our RENATE members. Anne can tell you an awful lot more about this than I can. So Anne, if you don't mind, you have the floor. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Brian. I hope everybody can hear me. I'll make this brief because time is of the essence here. I prepared something to share with you in relation to the grant application to Mission Cara. And RENATE, the network, are really pleased to have secured a financial grant support from Mission Cara. Mission Cara is an Irish organisation that provides funding and support for international development work of various organizations, including missionary organizations. And we consider this timely, relevant funding hugely valuable, given the UN recognized human trafficking dangers facing displaced persons in Ukraine and bordering countries as they are forced to flee war. RENATE applied for funding of initiatives such as the security, personal protection and trafficking hotline information, together with counselling support and some basic food, blanket and first aid supports. And this is ultimately to enhance the potential for targeted at-risk forcibly displaced people to avoid human trafficking at all possible. The grant funding also helps RENATE members network and coordinate with each other, as you have this evening through the sharing from the different countries who have been successful in securing the grant, coordinating with each other and with relevant authorities within the 3 participating countries, with UN agencies and CSOs, in order to identify issues and perhaps better target anti-trafficking supports in this crisis period. And again, this, I may be repeating myself, but this was something that Sean has identified quite clearly in his presentation earlier on. For your information, the 4 RENATE members working at grassroots levels at the following organizations will be in receipt of funding, grant funding, a small grant, which will last for projects working over a period of 3 months maximum. And this is Caritas International Ukraine, Solwadi Hungary, the Bakita Network Poland, and another Polish network, POMOK, which is the Mary Immaculate Association for Women and Children. These are the 3 countries and the 4 projects. So each of the selected projects are provided urgent response, or they're providing urgent response to the sudden onset emergencies in Ukraine and on the borders with Ukraine. And you've heard through the presentations here tonight what those particular urgent responses are. An important consideration in terms of our grant application is the assurance of safeguarding. And RENATE has confirmed that the 4 organizations implementing their projects will have a safeguarding person in place at each project site, who will in turn ensure that there are safeguarding policies also in place. And as the main project holder, RENATE, we trust, of course, that we ourselves will continue to monitor safeguarding across the project. Just in terms of some sort of fundamental underlying principles that in applying for the grant and in implementing the various projects under the grant, RENATE takes cognizance of core humanitarian standards. It's good to make that explicit. It's implicit in all we do, but nonetheless, we have to make that explicit. And that means that the projects demonstrate respect for the humanitarian imperative, independence, impartiality, non-discrimination, and of course, the dignity and participation of beneficiaries. There are also accountability requirements. There's the need on all of us to ensure, particularly at RENATE level, that we are managing evaluations on a monthly basis, and that there is reporting for funding that has been secured. Another fundamental, of course, that the projects themselves help build community resilience, not just amongst the displaced persons, but also amongst those of us who work collaboratively across the network and across different organizations to work collaboratively, and ideally to contribute to our disaster response capacity in framing any intervention. So through the emergency grant, RENATE can support its own members to respond to the initial stages of this humanitarian emergency in a fast and efficient manner, based on the principles of international humanitarian law and the code of conduct of the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movements for NGOs engaging in disaster response. So you can see that while we're looking for funding, there are very secure pillars of safeguarding and of interventions and propriety that we have to observe ourselves. The size of the project supported varies according to the needs of the situation and the capacity of each organisation in the respective countries. And as you've heard from the various speakers this evening, examples of the interventions range from the basics, such as provision of water, sanitation, health services, emergency shelter, emergency feeding programs, safe transportation, education in order to maintain stability of routine for the youngest displaced persons, the distribution of emergency supplies, such as non-food items, tents. The word went out, we need 500 tents, tarpaulins, blankets, mattresses, buckets. Then there's the urgent production of information flyers in numerous languages, which have been posted widely, both physically and via social media. And members are also providing language training programs with a view to helping displaced persons become independent and possibly gain employment for the duration of the time, however long that they are displaced. Finally, the provision of psychological supports and trauma counselling is also being provided as essential supports. So this gives you just a little whistle-stop run through of the provisions that will be provided for by members who have secured the grants. So let me now conclude by acknowledging Anthony Hannon. Anthony Hannon is the Missionary Development Coordinator at Mary Ward International, Ireland, who helped with the framing of the final proposals and the submission to Mission Cora, and who has kept a vigil with Imelda particularly, and with Mary Ward International to ensure that we, I suppose, met with the different criteria, we met the different criteria, and that our applications were successful. So thank you to Anthony. I can't forget to mention Artan Tosca, Tani, our finance officer at RENATE and at Mary Ward. Tani prepared all the financial details, minutiae of which are boggling, but he has a great skill and a gift and generosity. So all the financial details of the grant application had to be prepared, and that was Tani. And of course, our president, Imelda Poole, whose constant oversight and vigilance ensured that the narrative itself was in line with RENATE's and Mission Cora's mission and vision. And so overall, none of this would have taken place without all of the applications and coming in from RENATE members on the ground, which had been vetted. And then, of course, we wish our very best to those that were successful and who've been here tonight to share with us. So over to you, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Anne, and for a very comprehensive outline of the funding from Mission Cara. We also thank most sincerely to Mission Cara for the kindness of their funding, without which much of what we attempt to do would not be possible. So I've been monitoring the chat as we've been going along, and we must have answered every question because there isn't one in it. What there is in the chat is plenty of support for those who have commented, plenty of thanks for those who have commented on the bravery, plenty of people have been moved to, I've had a number of comments that have come directly to me, people have been very, very moved by what they have heard. I'm conscious too of the time. Now, we did start a little bit late because we did have a technical hitch, and I apologize for that. But what we do hope to do is to take this recording and to make it available a little bit later on, for those who perhaps couldn't make it this evening, something that we can share with others. What I might do though is we did have a number of countries. We had Sean from Poland. We had Judith and Erica from Hungary, and we have Gabriella from Poland. What I might do before I close off, because everybody's had a chance to hear everybody else, I might give maybe Sean 1 minute, maybe in response, if he might like to offer a comment. One thing that I think might be worth mentioning is what of government support where you are. So maybe we went to Sean, Judith and Gabriella, and after that we might close. So Sean, if you wouldn't mind, if you had a final comment. If not, that's fine, but I'm just conscious of time and where we're at. Thank you, Sean.
Sure. I think your question was, Brian, what is the government, what governments can do?
That's it. Thank you.
And I am actually meeting with Congressman Chris Smith and his staffers next week in DC if I'm allowed to travel. I have COVID currently right now, so my voice is a little bit off, but I will be meeting with Congressman Smith and his staffers, and also with Representative Congressman French Hill. And so would love to take, if you have any feedback that I can share with them around the response. We'll be taking our information back, but really ensuring that there are good, solid protection measures in place. Support the right to work for individuals. The right to work is critical, and to have programs in place to actually help people find jobs, that because that's going to give people independence, that's going to give them empowerment, and that's going to be really important. Continuing to support Ukraine as much as humanly possible. because there are some very brave men and women there that need our support. So I would say that, and then I would say really ensuring as people come across that there are vetted individuals, volunteers, and then we as an NGO, CSO community vet ourselves, and we develop standards of practice that we can share with one another, that we make sure that people that have access to refugees or as they're looking to a job or the next place, to support them in that. So I would say that that would be just a few comments from us in terms of government continuing to supply Ukrainians with what they need to defend themselves, but then also ensuring people have the right to work and the support to work and protection from trafficking in persons. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Sean, and mind yourself with that COVID too. Thank you very much indeed. Sister Judith, is there anything you would like to add before we close this evening?
Just very shortly, for us in Hungary, it is very important to help all the people who are coming to us, whether they need a job or they want to travel to other countries. But the other part, it is very important to help all the people, the inner refugees in the western part of Ukraine, because that region is already very poor, and we Hungary is supporting them, the Hungarian people, but not only the Hungarian people, but also the Ukrainian people who don't want to leave Ukraine, but want to stay in the western part of Ukraine, and that is very important. Tons and tons of goods and food and everything they need, they are transported there. So I think that is a special thing Hungary is doing besides of the other things.
Thank you, Judith. And Gabriella, is there anything you would like to add to that?
Yes, I think that the most important thing in our acting is to remember that love is a strategy, because we cannot act only with hot heart at the moment, but our acting has to be very wise. Besides, we have to see a person in each Ukrainian human being, because sometimes we don't treat these people with confidence, with faith. But it is very important to have an empathy to every Ukrainian man and woman. I think that the respect for them is very important, and let's do what we can, what we could do, what we can do, and then trust everything to God. Yes.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you
indeed, Sister Gabriella. And out of respect too for our Ukrainian friends, Carolina, is there a last word you might like to have, or Natalia indeed?
Well, on this note, just to say a huge thank you again, and that we're really proud to be here with you and working with you and helping as much as we can, because it feels right, and that's what we can do right now, and we will stand all together in this. And we hope that, you know, this particular war will be over soon, and we all will be able to, you know, deal with the consequences in the best way possible for all of us. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolina. Natalia, would you like the very last word?
Yeah, just take into account the protracted nature of this crisis. I believe it's very important to keep high this problem, this armed conflict, this war, so that international interest does not decreases with the flow of time. That's what our Ukrainian government is afraid of, that, you know, quite soon everybody will get used that, oh, this war, oh, it's so bad, it's terrible, but I'm tired of it. So we shouldn't make it happen. Lots of people die every day, not only soldiers, lots of civilian population. And that's why we have to continue helping and increasing the interest in what is going on there. So thank you for what has been already done. And I hope that, yeah, the good work will continue.
Thank you, Natalia, very much indeed. And I'd also like to thank Yvonne, Margaret, Aphrodite and Eilish, who are also part of the group who helped to put together this webinar, but are here somewhere in the background there. Also to Greg and Angela, who helped prepare some of the flyers and that kind of thing. Just before I go, I have to say, from my own point of view, I feel as though I have been privileged to be a part of this. And like so many of the comments, I've been very, very moved. I might just invite Imelda back for the very last word, seeing as Imelda did start the event for us. Imelda, would that be okay with you?
Well, I've just been extremely moved throughout this webinar by each of you speakers sharing from your heart, even with your tears and emotions, sharing the love that you have for the work you are doing. And I think we have a gratitude in our hearts that we are a body of people who have a heart to love and a heart of compassion and a heart which actually sees with the eyes the suffering, and the compassion is born from that. And I think tonight's webinar has been an extraordinary outburst of compassion and care. And I really resonate with Natalia's last words, and I think we should really remember those. Yes, we can become tired of caring. It is hard. It is a cross. We are with Jesus on the cross, and the cross comes forth from the compassion of Jesus for others. So maybe we can go to our hearts in prayer to give us the energy to keep going, to stay with the road all the way through this war, and to be with each other and to know that we need each other, because it is a draining time for most of you who are at the coalface especially. So yeah, let's keep our hearts awake, alight, and the flame burning throughout. And do nudge us, Natalia and Carolina, if you feel we are erring and diminishing our enthusiasm and our care during this time. So thank you, everybody, and the awareness raising group who did initiate this webinar indeed. And to Brian, wonderful moderation. Thank you so much. And to Anne for setting up this webinar and for your final words, and to Missy and Cara for your support in our journey. So yes, I hand back to you, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Imelda. And that really does conclude the business of this evening's meeting, a little bit over time, but there was no way we could shorten something as important and as moving and as difficult, I suppose, as this has been. So thank you to all who have attended, and we will make this recording available for much further than those who came, but you may also have the chance to see it again. So thanks indeed.